At the same time, we've also seen a collapse in things that used to give ordinary people meaning. You see a collapse in functional Christianity, secularism spreading everywhere, especially among the young. And even among those who do call themselves religious and are, it has become less and less a force of meaning in the universe and the world than a cultural identification or a political position. And so when disaster hits, or when crisis looms, a lot of people find they don't have that old religion to fall back on. The reassurance, the community, the values that gave their lives some meaning. And so you get increasing bewilderment, higher levels of depression. Since the turn of the century, really significant increases in suicides and massive increases in deaths of despair, and a vast opioid epidemic in which many of the people caught in this trap are numbing themselves into some form of escape. I don't need to tell you this. It's everywhere around us. And all this begins to combine to create a sense of beleaguerment and of alienation from the other prosperous America. A sense of cultural isolation as well. You can see this in all those people who've honestly gone out and talked to Trump voters, regular people out there. This is what they're feeling, that their identity, the meaning of their lives, is somehow under threat. It's not just about whether they're getting a higher wage or not, but the place they have in the society and the culture. When was the last time you saw a sitcom about a white working class family? You look on cable and it's all fashionable, hip, multicultural images. And that's great. And we should be very proud of what we've done in our big cities and our metropolitan areas in terms of managing to manage this extraordinary explosion in diversity and multiculturalism. But elsewhere, it's not so happy. Within that context, a figure who emerges, who says, "I hear you," when no one else had really said that, is going to have a huge advantage. When he speaks the same way as most people speak, sometimes with the same pejoratives. When he spells the way people spell. And when people criticize that spelling, what do his supporters hear? They hear themselves being criticized. They have at this point identified with this figure. That's different than agreeing with him or supporting him. He is them. The facts don't really matter, because in this divided country where you feel like there are two countries and you are really being left behind, this is the one guy that seemed to emerge that talked your language and addressed your concerns. So the philosophy of late-stage democracy leads to tyranny. The particular forces that have been shaping our particular moment in human history have made a very ripe and fertile ground for the ability of someone to come along and do that. The collapse of old authoritative institutions that would have prevented this democratic upsurge, like party elites who would have said in the old days, "Forget it, you're not even a Democrat. You can't run for our nomination. Or we'll decide at the convention and the elites will have as much to say as the ordinary people." Well, that's all gone. And so we come to this actual particular figure. I'm persuaded through reading and study that history is often about big forces that I've talked about. It's also about human nature, which is, I believe, a permanent feature, and that the ancients were grappling with and understanding what monarchy and oligarchy and aristocracy and democracy was really about. But this guy, as an individual, can also change history. History is not just these forces, it's also those that come along or are thrown up by circumstance or moment or chance who exploit that moment and do so very well. I think one of the things that has been underestimated about Donald J. Trump is his extraordinary demagogic ability. This is what transformed what was a fertile ground for him into a triumphal march. Those first rallies, carried, thankfully, by CNN live, endlessly, it's worth watching them again. It's worth watching them now. This is the first president that does as many campaign rallies in government as in a campaign. Because he's smart and he knows exactly what he's doing, like all good demagogues and salesmen do. Tell a story directly to the people, appeal to them, be on their side, find an enemy, mainly the elites or the immigrants, these people that have been, as I said before, have been part of the alienation of Middle America. Tell them he gets them. Use rhetoric brilliantly. Evolve over time by listening to the crowd, by assessing its responses, and learning over time to press certain buttons that no other politician in liberal democracy ever really wants to press. A man who came from no political context whatsoever, first time ever in this country, no even awareness of our constitutional system, not even understanding of the role of the president within that system. And also, as well as being a brilliant demagogue, being psychologically extremely ill. And I'm not saying this as a joke, even though people laugh at it. He is an absolute case study in what's called malignant narcissism. He sees nothing outside of himself and his own interests, and never has. Quite rare to have no appreciation of other people's desires, views, feelings that might conflict with yours. He is a zero-sum person. Everything, he either wins or he loses. Every interaction is zero-sum. That's why he doesn't understand trade. He literally has no concept of what it is, which is, you sell me something, I'll sell you something back, we both gain. Great. We're both better off. It's a non-zero-sum interaction. Cannot understand that. He wants to know who won in that exchange, who got the better deal, who won. He can't understand why someone in a political system like a liberal democracy might stand up and say, I disagree with you and I want to stop this. He can't understand that as a useful part, in fact, an integral part of a democratic process that usually has in history led to better results. No, it is a hack on him personally. And because he then adopts this pathological position of zero sum, he also conveys that and instills that in his own support, who also begin to see nothing as non-zero sum and everything as zero sum. And so tribalism becomes very powerful in the country. And he is not a president, he's a tribal leader. It does not enter his mind, and has never, how to become president of all the people, including those who voted against him. And in some ways you think, what a tragedy that is. Could you imagine if he'd started off by saying, first off, we're going to do infrastructure. And now we're going to give you all a big middle-class tax cut. And now we're going to do some tough free trade negotiations. And we're going to find a way to actually restrict illegal immigration with the Democrats by allowing a path to citizenship for everyone. He could be striding the political world like a colossus right now, if he had been smart enough to do the things that even people like Steve Bannon proposed to him. And other leaders elsewhere have more successfully deployed. Instead, his only legacy is a massive tax cut to the very wealthy and a big tax hike on most people through tariffs. The opposite of what he proposed. On top of this, we have what we have turned the presidency of the United States into. The founders never contemplated a presidency with this much power. Let's take him out of the equation and look at Obama. Think of the powers the executive branch now has compared to, say, the legislative branch. Since the Cold War, we've given that president power alone to end life on Earth as we know it. The legislature, the Senate, the Congress have constantly deferred foreign policy to the executive. He has the ability, if he wanted to invade every individual citizen's privacy to an extraordinary degree through the technology that government now wields. All initiatives in our public policy tend to come from the president, not the legislature. And at the same time, we've had a theory since the 1970s, really, in conservative intellectual thought about what's called the unitary executive, which gives far more power to the executive branch in control of its own functionaries, with no actual check from outside than ever before. In other words, the judiciary has become, under conservative guidance, more and more subservient to the executive, less and less willing to check the executive. And the condition and criterion for every judge appointed in this administration has been only one thing that's really truly consistent, and that is the executive can do no wrong. It is not our role to check the president. And so we have this particular disturbed individual in a bloated and overpowerful executive branch, connected with, umbilically, in its identity, with around 30% of the country. It is not, and we are not living in a liberal democracy. We are living in a weird situation in which we kind of have a pseudo-monarchy within a constitutional framework, and in which the only thing that really matters is him. He tells us that all the time. And unfortunately, we kind of true. He enforces this in a way that no previous president has, with daily, hourly, minute-by-minute communication of an extreme tribalizing and polarizing intent, a very high emotionalism. It's all about feeling. Tribalism is also about feeling. It's about your identity, who you are. He's brilliant understanding it. And our culture also, because of social media, because of the internet, has allowed everybody to express their feelings powerfully and not in front of anybody actually else, to a screen where it's so much easier to say crazy things, and where other crazy people can back you up in your crazy things. And so over time, the public discourse becomes this complete cacophony of feeling and emotion and anger and resentment and fury. And of course, the paradox of this is that the opposition to him, in some ways, has no way to respond to him except by mirroring him. So the left has been pushed further and further into the very pole position where they're actually less popular in some respect. And presidential candidates on the Democratic side are constantly talking about as if they are going to be elected dictator for 4 years. Kamala Harris saying if Congress does not pass gun control laws, she will act after 30 days and go confiscate them herself. Completely unconstitutional. So where do we go? He has several things in his favor. There is really no, so far, discernible collapse in his core 30% support. That's enough to prevent the Senate convicting him, even if he were found guilty plainly of an impeachable offense, which I think is true. Here's the level of his hold on the base. A poll came out yesterday that showed that 40% of Republicans do not believe he mentioned Biden on the phone call with Prime Minister Zelensky, even though he has admitted it, even though it is in the plain transcript, even though it is in the whistleblower complaint. So you could, again, he said it himself, I could shoot someone dead on Fifth Avenue and they would not move at all. That someone with his psyche and temperament knows that is an extraordinarily frightening idea. And the other thing that's true, and I'll leave you on this very positive note, is that the tyrannical psyche is not linear. It's not static. It's dynamic. Each breach of a norm instantly becomes the baseline for the next one. And we are constantly in fear because he keeps us in that fear, that he will break every norm if he has to. No previous president has ever said, maybe I won't quit if I lose an election. No one has ever said, maybe I'll have 3 terms or 4 terms. Repeatedly. He said even in the last campaign that he might not respect the result if he lost, because millions of illegals have voted against him. He is currently calling a constitutional exercise called impeachment that is perfectly within the constitutional order a coup against him, and is at war with most of the agencies of the U.S. government. Cabinet government is done, over with. The idea that these federal agencies have autonomous leaders or have any accountability is completely gone. That's why he likes acting secretaries so much, because they're there only for a temporary period. And every single one of them has to obey him completely. And over the last 2.5 years, like all tyrants, slowly the dissenters have been weeded out. The incentive structure is in there that the only people who survive this are the most obsequious, the most obedient, in following someone who has no idea of the Constitution and who his own Secretary of State said persistently asked him to break the law every day. So we are in, and have been actually in, an emergency for quite a while. That the greatest mistake is to underestimate that crisis and emergency. He has never backed down, never conceded anything in his life. He will lie and lie and lie rather than actually allow reality to damage his own psyche. And the thing about impeachment, with the facts of impeachment and the discussion of it, is that it really is bringing the reality into conflict with his psyche. He believes a certain thing. There's a deep state attempt from the beginning to spy on me and to get me. And I'm now going to use my Justice Department to get at Obama and Clinton once again. And I am going, all these things in his head that you have to really watch Sean Hannity repeatedly to even begin to understand, reveal a man capable of doing anything to protect his psyche. And the closer reality comes to confronting him, the more angry he will become, and the more vicious, and the more inflamed. Usually in countries with very powerful emotional currents going through them, including this country in the past, when racial tensions or social tensions are at a peak, in every particular instance before now, the President of the United States has understood his responsibility, even though he's on one side of the debate, say, to tell people to calm down, to respect the rule of law, to tone their rhetoric, to realize we're all in this together, we're all Americans. We can hash these things out, the process works. He actually will further inflame the emotions and the passions. He, again, has no idea of the role of the presidency in sustaining the entire republic. A presidency that will be glad to hand on to another person. Which brings me to the final point, which is that I do not believe, and I know this will seem crazy, but interesting to see Tom Edsall in the New York Times today visit it. I don't think he will leave this office voluntarily, even if he loses an election. He cannot comprehend a repudiation of what he regards as his own identity. He may go, but will have to exercise quite extraordinary force to do it. But my fear is that he won't, and that a re-election is more likely than not.